de Medicina de la Universidad Andrés Bello de Viña del Mar. La entrevista será en inglés. El público podrá hacer preguntas a través de la chat en YouTube. La primera parte de la entrevista Neuroethics de la Instituto, y después en la segunda parte vamos a tomar algunas preguntas del público. La entrevista será en inglés, ahora voy a hablar en inglés. Well, welcome, Steven. Thank you for joining us. Let's start with your work. Could you describe your research and how you got into the topic of AI in medicine?
Yeah, so first, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here. I'm not an expert of ethics of AI by nature. My first research was done on neurophilosophy, meaning I was very sort of obsessed almost by the mind-brain problem or the mind-body problem, which is a typical problem in philosophy of mind. But in philosophy of mind, you also have other more sub-problems, like the problem of artificial consciousness. So I was always a bit interested in AI, but not directly. But after I finished my PhD, I was a bit tired of the topic. You know how a PhD is. You invest many years working on the same problem, so it can be a bit exhausting. And then I wrote a book on the topic of my PhD, so I thought I was almost like finished. My contribution for that specific problem was sort of finished. I'm not sure if it was a good contribution or not, but I was tired, so I wanted to move. I wanted to keep some of my current work, but I wanted to move to a different direction. So the ethics of AI were interesting for me. During my PhD, I was also working on other topics like the ethics of simulation, for example, or even like the metaphysics of mind uploading, which are a bit related with AI, but not directly. But basically, I was thinking how or what kind of research I want to do in the next 5 years or so. So the ethics of AI, particularly in applications of medicine, were something interesting for me. So then I just submitted a project. I was also working on other topics like the ethics of project. And here I am now, yes.
Perfect, that's fantastic. And let us talk a bit more specifically about some specific ethical issues that are happening in the medical field. Could you tell us a bit what you think are the main ethical concerns regarding the application of AI in health-related studies?
So the ethics of AI in medicine is now a field that is flourishing a lot. So we are investing a lot of money and energy and time as well to develop specific tools. Basically, the main assumption of the application of AI in medicine is the idea that we can make or we can transform medicine into a more efficient, a faster and also more cheaper in general medicine by applying some specific AI tools to different practice in medicine, like diagnostic, for example. If you use AI for diagnosing cancer, skin cancer, for example, we have interesting data that shows that many AI models are more accurate than human doctors by doing. Also, like AI systems they don't need to get a salary, they can work 24 hours, they don't strike compared with human doctors. So there are many advantages of using AI in medicine, but a lot of these AI models, the nature of this AI model is somehow controversial because they are based on millions of data that basically no human or no group of human beings can literally explain. So, like, from a human point of view, we understand the information we get into the system. We also understand the outputs of that system, but we don't really know how the system can cross the information inside. And this is commonly called the black box problem in AI. So, for me, the black box problem in AI applied to medicine is an important one, because in medicine there is also this assumption that the patient believes that the doctor is in full control of the practice of medicine, and I think with AI, the doctor lose a bit of that, lose a bit of the control, at least partially. And this is the problem, because if the doctor will have to make a medical decision about a patient, but part of that process is obscure from an epistemic point of view, then this is an ethical problem for me. And part of my work is to try to arrange a solution for this specific problem.
Yeah, like there's speaking a bit about the black box problem. So a lot of people who are like interested in the ethical concern of AI, they link it to problems with accountability, responsibility if something like goes wrong. So could you tell us a bit what kind of solution you're thinking for mitigating the black box problem?
Right. So the black box problem can have different consequences, I guess, ethical consequences. I'm more interested in the trust gap in AI, but I also did some work on the responsibility gap, which is sort of how we can account for AI systems. And I wrote a paper in 2019. I was young. It's been a while, but I wrote this paper on, it's called The Responsibility Gap in Artificial Intelligence. And basically, I tried to argue for a view that was developed by Luciano Floridi. Luciano Floridi argues that in order to account for the morality of AI systems, we actually need to change a bit how we think about ethics. Because until AI systems, we were thinking about ethics as a morality that is based on human agents, specifically, and human agents that are conscious beings and they have intentionality. But artificial intelligence systems, they are not conscious, at least for now, but they do something that is more important, at least for Floridi, which is they have ethical consequences in the world. They have impacts through their autonomy. So for Floridi, autonomy is more important than intentionality, and because of that we need to change from intentional ethics for a no-intentional ethics, meaning that we have to account also for the kind of consequences that these AI systems are given to the world. And for that we need to change the way we describe normatively also these agents. So Floridi advanced with a conceptual change, which he called we need to think about distributed morality instead of thinking individual morality for each agent. And basically I tried to apply this notion of distributed morality for responsibility, and I came up with this concept of distributed responsibility, which means basically that in order to account for the morality of an AI systems, we need to account for the network where that AI system is embedded. Meaning that whenever you are thinking about an AI model, you are thinking that the AI model was developed by specific developers in the software and in the hardware, by a specific company. This company is embedded in a specific regulation and in a country. And then you also have the end users that will use that specific AI models. So in my view, accountability should be divided by all of these networks, or all of the parts of the networks. And this will allow to make that each part of the network can sort of behave neutrally or more positively. Because if it behaves negatively from an ethical point of view, it can be corrected by the next part of the network. So this is a very theoretical, we don't have any practical data about that. We can do simulations to see if it works or not, but it was an attempt to address the responsibility gap directly. Basically, the message is we need to think about distributed responsibility and not individual responsibility, and this is a bit different from collective responsibility, which is widely used for businesses, for faculties, for example. It's a bit different because there you are still pointing out to mental beings, like people who have beliefs, but distributed morality should be applied also to non-mental agents, basically. So.
Super interesting. Do you think that this idea of like distributed responsibility could work for some popular technologies that are like, ethically suspicious, things of like autonomous vehicles or autonomous weapons or like sex robots. Do you think that this notion of distributed responsibility could help us get a better moral understanding of our relationship with, for example, sex robots?
Right. Yeah. So when I was writing this paper, my focus was on applying this framework to autonomous cars and also to autonomous weapons, because I think it was a nice. Both technologies are nice case studies to show the applicability of the general thesis. But basically, if you think about autonomous car, for example, you can think that instead of attributing the responsibility just to the driver or just to the company who is developing the car, you can actually distribute the responsibility to everyone. And this will create this sort of, I don't know how to call it, but like a constant ethical, supervision of each part of the network. Because if everyone knows that they will be accountable, then they will make efforts to act neutrally or at least positively, but never negatively. So, but of course, this is very controversial. Some companies are developing basically different ethical, theoretical, let me try it again. So some companies are thinking about the responsibility gap is too hard to solve, so let's do something else. Let's create different autonomous cars with different ethical inspirations, basically. So let's create this model who will be a utilitarianism, and let's create this model will be a deontological, and then the users, the buyers can choose which model they prefer, and then they will be accountable because they made a choice, right? So this is it's a very pragmatic way. I'm not sure it's the right way, but it's a very pragmatic way. We also have the pragmatic decisions, for example, in Germany. In Germany, it was decided that every autonomous car should brake, no matter the consequences, in the case where there is a dilemma, of course. So, but now we can focus on the ethics of sex robots. So I think the ethics of sex robots are a bit different because they involve an anthropomorphization of the technology, which is very different from autonomous cars or autonomous weapons. I think when we think about the ethics of sex robots, they can be interesting because we have interesting data that shows, for example, that most people are not happy with their sexual life, for example. And sex robots can play a role in that because, at least for some theories about well-being of humans, sexual pleasure is an important part of what it means to be human. So sex robots can have an interesting role there. And then we know a lot. We also know that millions of people in the world are being used for sexual purposes in a very unethical way. So if sex robots can replace those human beings, in that awful situation, then I think there is also a positive argument in favor of the use and development of sex robots. Moreover, there are some people who have mental or physical, disabilities, and it's hard for them to engage, with sexual partners and etc. So in this case, sexual robots can also be an interesting alternative for them. And then you also have people who are not considered attractive in general by aesthetic standards of society, and again the argument is that they should not be deprived from sexual pleasure, so sex robots can also play an interesting role there. But there are also negative arguments against the use of sex robots. Mainly 90% of sex robots are recreating the women's body. And some people argue that this is very sexist, and it basically it can amplify already existing notions of sexism in society, and we need to create technologies that can fight those biases, and not one that can make them stronger. So some feminist theories argue that sex robots are completely unethical because they are recreating these sexist biases that we need actually to fight. Then there are also people who believe that sex robots are harmful for society because we have preliminary data about the use of sex robots in high-tech societies like Japan and South Korea. Basically, mostly men are preferring sexual intercourses with robots instead of real women, and women in general. And this is a problem because also, first, it can create a sort of addiction, psychological addiction that we can see in pornography as well. But then it's also a problem. I'm not sure for me it's a problem, but at least for some ethical discussions, it's a problem for natality, for procreation. So these societies now are getting very old. People are not having enough children, and some people think that the use of sex robots can also amplify this problem that is already a problem in most societies. So for me, the ethics of sex robots it's a very nuanced topic that we need to be careful. But I think if you analyze the pros and cons of all these arguments, I think we can at least reach a way to have like sufficient ethical standards to develop or to use or to justify ethically the use of sex robots, at least in specific cases. I'm not saying that sex robots are morally justifying any cases, but I'm not sure the total prohibition is also interesting. I think AI ethics requires a lot of nuanced thinking, you know, and sometimes the society works a lot between extremes, you know, like total prohibition or total liberation. And I think most of AI technology will require a more nuanced, you know, approach. Yeah.
Yeah, this is very, very interesting because it really shows what you mentioned with Floridi, that these machines, they can help us like get a better understanding of our like ethics and how we can develop these notions of responsibility. So I like that your distributed approach can really emphasize the need to take into account of all the parts involved in this relationship with the machine. And there's the part that you mentioned that is related to my next question, has to do with this idea of, well, in the case of sex robots, then you can, in a way, democratize access to a certain kind of activity that for aesthetic standards or, you know, other societal reason, a lot of people don't have that. So you might think, well, this is kind of a side effect of AI technology, that in some ways you democratize access to certain kind of goods, not only in the case of sex robots. There are people who think that AI will exacerbate social inequalities, and so I would like to ask you whether you are more optimist or pessimist about the impact in society of AI technology, particularly with respect to social inequalities. So do you think that they will be beneficial to mitigate social inequalities, or do you think that there's a real risk of, like, you know, increasing the gap?
Right. Yeah, so that's a very complex question, I guess, because if you look at the history of the use of technology, we don't have we are not good students, let's say, right? So I think first of all, we need to fight this, what I call like a methodological bias between ethics and technology. So instead of developing the technology first and only then thinking the ethical consequences of that technology, I think we should invert this situation. We need actually to think the ethics of the technology before, during, and after the technology is developed. So there are some interesting frameworks like Ethics by Design, who tries to show the relevance of ethics in each part of the process of developing a specific technology. Of course, I think AI can help to democratize a lot of interesting values. So for example, I'm trying to write a paper now which tries to argue that AI medicine should be society's priority right now, instead of developing other technologies that are interesting but they are not urgent. I think we should put all our efforts to develop actually specific tools that can have impact in healthcare in general. Why? Because half of the world almost doesn't have access to primary healthcare, and I think this is a way to democratize also the access to medicine. Of course, part of this is based on leadership as well, right? So we need the right governments, we need also the right faculty members to decide the right policies, you know, and and this demands also something that we are starting to get now, but is still missing, which is AI literacy. Many people don't have enough knowledge about what AI is, and especially even if you think about common people, even students, whenever we are using an app, for example, like Facebook or Instagram, we don't really know the kind of data we are providing to that systems, to that businesses, and we don't have a clue what they are doing with our data, right? So I think an important part or an important aspect that should be taken into consideration is that people also have a moral obligation to know more, to know better, you know, to make this effort about before using an app, for example, or social media, to get informed about what are the consequences of that. Of course, we also need the right regulation, and this is a problem because right now we are dealing with 3 or 4 major groups. We are dealing with China, who doesn't have a lot of regulation and is spending a lot of efforts to develop almost blindly any relevant technology that they think is useful for them. Then Europe is trying to regulate, but without affecting the efficiency of the development. And then America, the United States, now with the new president, who I think is he can bring interesting policies about AI development, but also maybe they will not be so much regulated. So we need to be very careful. We need to play also the political game, right? So I think the most important aspect here is that society should focus more on ethical expertise of AI. So ethicists needs to have a better role in these decisions. This includes the need for interdisciplinary, approaches to AI, because of course the technical development is important, but I think whenever a technology has impact in society in different cases, all different professions needs to be represented in that development. So imagine like a chatbot for psychological support, for example. I think psychologists needs to have a direct role in the development of that technology as well. So we need to be very careful about testing the ethical implications of each technology first, and only then, when we reached an interesting and sufficient ethical standard, then we can use we can provide a service we can sell the service, for example. Of course, many businesses see ethics as a sort of as a negative partner, right? But I think it can be also important for a business to be ethical, right? It can be also a marketing, aspect that a business can sell. So now we have a new social media called Blue Sky, I think, right? So they are trying to be more transparent and make it clear about what kind of data they are using. And I think this is the right way to think about the relationship between technology and ethics, because then each user can decide, maybe I prefer a more ethical app, social media, for example, and I will stop using other social media that are not so transparent. So I think it's a very complex problem that requires many different approaches from leadership, but also from common people. We all need to be more aware of the ethical impact of the technology, and also we need to make a more critical effort, to evaluate how the technology can impact your own life. And I think that's it.
Super interesting. I would like to, there's a lot of importance and interesting aspects of your answers. I would like to go back to the question of AI literacy, because of course this is a very important topic for a university, for in an educational context. And you spoke about, people like citizens, perhaps they have a more responsibility to know more. And one thing that I'm wondering is whether as educators will also have a more responsibility to give students in particular the opportunity to know more, because you can impose more requirements, but if you don't give the resources to satisfy them, it's hard to be more in that sense. And I would like to ask you, in your view, if you have any thoughts on what is the best way for educators or like teachers like us to promote AI literacy within a university?
Right. So I think right now we are still very early in the stage of the development of the technology. But what we need to do is to test basically different approaches, different ways to and see which one works better. So for example, there is a lot of controversy right now regarding the use of large language models in universities. So one approach is to say, okay, let's just ban all the use of ChatGPT, for example, by students. But I think this is an approach. It's a very practical and very simple approach, but I think it will miss an important aspect, right? So, and the aspect is that society and educational is also changing. If you look at current education, you see that the philosophical basis of current education have like more than 100 years. They are based on specific models of how the mind worked that are currently not right. So they are very based on memorization in a vertical setting between the professor and the student. It's a very passive way of educating. And I think technology can bring something new. So it can bring a more active and more dynamic way of thinking. And when you look at more active ways of educating students, you see that they are more efficient as well. Students learn more and better when they have a more active role in the classroom, for example. So I think ChatGPT can be an opportunity also to develop more creative ways of educating our students. I think educators also have a more responsibility to think about new settings for education. For example, one way to use ChatGPT is actually to say that every student should use ChatGPT for a specific assignment, and then you can, for example, you can write a paper co-authored with the assistance of ChatGPT, but then you have to perform a more oral defense of your paper, for example. So this will create a situation where the students can use ChatGPT and can learn things that you will not learn, but also you will have you will have to really know what the paper is about, right? Because you will have to perform an oral defense of that paper. So I think we can think about mixed models between the current education and also a more advanced education. Of course, it's hard to say right now what is the right way to think about the relationship between technology and education, but I think it's also a good opportunity for educators to test different ways to develop this and see the feedback of students and see also what is the impact for the job market, for example, and based on that, I really like, because in all these in these conversations, sometimes there is this problem of how AI ethics is based on general problems or general principles, and this can be a problem because technology is a very practical part of the world. So how can we can cross this gap between two abstract principles and case studies that are very practical? I think we can think like John Rawls' approach to reflective equilibrium is an interesting one, where you basically start with a principle, you go to a case study, but then from the case study you also update your own principles, but you don't stop there. You come back to the case principle, so you are always dancing between the abstract and the particular, and you are always improving both. So I think this is a way to apply it in education right now. I think it's a good way to think. So we think about a solution, we test it, and then we can update the first solution. Yeah.
Perfect. Before moving on taking some questions from the audience, I would like to ask you one more thing. So I'm in agreement with this idea that these technologies can give us education and educators an opportunity to evolve, to learn and discover new ways to become better teachers, and to provide something, as you said, like the fulfillment of a moral responsibility to know more and to prepare students better for a society that, as you mentioned, is changing. But a lot of teachers, or at least a consistent amount of teachers, share this fear, this concern that this technology is in some way replacing something very important about the role of educators, of human educators. So do you share the concerns? Do you have something to say to these educators who fear the introduction of these technologies?
Yeah, so when you look at the history of technology, that sentiment, I would say, or that intuition or that bias is always present whenever you are confronted by a new technology. So imagine like when elevators when they started to be used, people were really afraid of them. So there was a need to guarantee that there was always a human present to just push the buttons, to go up or to go down. But of course, that human does not contribute for the efficiency of the elevator or for the security. It doesn't have a role. But people were feeling more safe by having that human present. And I think this is part of this intuition about the technology. There is always a distrust of the technology because most people don't know about it, right? And when you think about educators, they were educators in a very different world, right? Where technology didn't have, like, internet was not a thing in the 80s, and people always have a bias to change. So it's really hard to show educators the value of something they don't understand, right? I think this will change because most students nowadays they were born in a technological world, so they will also demand more technological options for their own education, and this is where leadership of universities will have to make decisions, really important decisions, if they want to keep an old system that works for some, but they are not interesting for most people, or if they want to update themselves with new technologies. Of course, I'm not claiming that we should just replace all education by technology. I think education is important for human connections as well. There is a human relationship between the professor and the student that is highly relevant for even for the efficiency of what the university is trying to offer. But I think we can use technology to also increase that human relation, right? Because if the professor is more free from common tasks that is currently making him busy, I think this can also be an opportunity to create more personalized education, for example, because the professor will be able to have more creative approaches to its own education, and it can also incorporate the diversity of students, because education, at least the old way of thinking education, is that there is a way to teach and all students needs to learn that way. So it's not personalized at all. Like, you have a common approach and all students needs to fit that common approach. But I think technology can bring something new, which is the professor can personalize the approach of education for each student. And this is interesting because it can make education more efficient for each student, right? Because some students are better at reading than at writing, for example. So you don't need to, you can tailor each model for each specific student, and this will increase the levels of education in general, which is also one of the outcomes of universities, for example, right? The way students learn is an important factor. So, and then, like, of course, students will demand a university that provide a more efficient way of studying as well. So I think university needs to be open, of course, in a critical way, but I think it's important to incorporate the new changes right now. Yeah.
Perfect. That's super interesting. Well, thank you very much, Steven. I'm gonna now take some questions from the public. So in the meantime, while we're waiting for some questions, I invite the audience to type them in the chat. But yeah, I want to go back about this topic of, we talked about ethical issues, and these are very important. This is the role that, for example, philosophers are, allegedly, they're trained at least to do good research in ethical issues. But do you think there are other topics related to AI that are more generally relevant for example, like humanities or arts?
Yeah, surely. So right now we have an interesting debate as well about about art, right? So if robots can do or make art, and I think it's an interesting debate, because
research in ethical issues. But do you think there are other topics related to AI that are more generally relevant for example, like humanities or arts?
Yeah, surely. So right now we have an interesting debate as well about about art, right? So if I guess, but I don't think it's the correct one. Why? Because if you think, for example, about what Alan Turing was trying to argue for, most people, when they think about Alan Turing, they think about the Turing test, and that the Turing test is a sort of test for identifying the intelligence of a system. But I don't think that was the message of Turing. I think the message of Turing was a different one, was basically to focus on the idea that many of our mental concepts will have to change how they are defined. So in the case of intelligence, what Turing was trying to say is that with the development of the technology, the way we apply the concept of intelligence or thinking will change. It will not be applied only for human subjects, but maybe we can apply it for others. So I think we can use this Turing intuition and apply it to art as well. So I think robots can make art. It doesn't. So because there is an assumption here, and this is what philosophers can contribute with. I think there is, whenever we say art can only be done by humans, or if robots can perform art, there is a hidden word that is not explicit here, which is, can robots create human art? And I don't think robots need to create human art. They can create art that is not human. And this is, I think it's a way to consider how robots can also be creative in some sense, because so they can be creative not in a human sense, but they can be creative. And this is a conceptual subtlety that I think we need to consider. Also, I think art should reflect somehow the world, and the world is not human anymore, right? So AI systems are here, they have consequences, so I think it's interesting that the world of art can also show this new ontology of the world, right? If you can project the real world will have AI applications, will have AI creativity, so I think artworks performed by robots can also teach us something about the world. And I think this is a specific take about aesthetics in general, so we call this a cognitive approach to art, but I think it's an important one. I think to know the world is also to know more about us humans, and understanding that the world of AI creativity can also be a way to understand how human creativity is or works. Yeah.
I think it's very interesting, because here we have again this idea that there's a fear, as you said, like that, it's quite common in the history of new technologies that humans feel as if they were going to be replaced by new technology. So now arts is made by machines, so what about human artists? But as you say, this underlying assumption is very important, because when you think that the kind of arts that the machines are making, the human are making, the kind of creativity that it is displayed by human and machine is just conceptually different,
Yeah.
then it would be a category mistake to think to be replaced, because
Yeah,
it's just
exactly.
it's just like a pluralism of arts and creativity. I think that it's very interesting. However, like some people, I don't know if you have some ideas about this worry that some people have with manipulated images, like generated images that can be used for, morally contentious issues. Do you have any take on that? So do you think that, I mean, I suspect that your answer will be related to your ethical approach, but do you think that AI arts particularly raise some specific ethical challenges?
Yeah, for sure. Like if you think about intellectual property, I think AI will change a lot of what we currently, the kind of regulations we currently have. But again, I think this worry can be diminished if, again, people can have or can increase their AI literacy. So if you have a more critical approach, and I think it's interesting because I think people will have to become a bit skeptical, in a philosophical sense. So whenever you are confronted with an image or with a text or a video, you will have to perform this skeptical, approach, which means that we cannot believe right away in something we are seeing or reading, and we will need to look for reasons to believe in that specific object. So this will require, again, a very specific critical approach to AI. Of course, there is another problem of the impact of this technology, which is for democracy itself, right? The value of democracy can also be dangerous when you see videos that are not real about politicians saying something about specific policies which are not true, basically. And this can be a problem, but I have a very specific view about democracy. So I believe current democracies are problematic from a moral point of view, because basically democracies are not related with the knowledge of citizens, but they are only related with a random factor, I think, which is the age, right? So right now, democracy asks you that if you have 18 years old, I don't know how it is in Chile, but in some countries it's 16. But so if you are 18 years old, you are available to participate in the democratic decision, but it doesn't matter the kind of information you have about that. So this is a problem because democracy or democratic decisions, they really decide specific things about justice, for example, for society. And when you base your democratic decisions on ignorance, this is based on a lot of empirical data we have about the common knowledge of citizens in general. So when you ask people what kind of knowledge they know about a specific election, for example, they know a lot of things that are completely irrelevant for their decision. For example, they know the name of the dog of the candidate, or the name of the wife of the candidate, or the husband. But this is not relevant information to the site, right? And when you ask them what kind of knowledge they have about that election, they basically know nothing. There is some studies that shows that a monkey choosing between two options randomly can be more accurate than most citizens in United States, for example. So I think we can use AI also to make democracy stronger in a way, and this will demand rethinking how democracies are made. And for me, we need to think ways to incentivize people to knowledge, basically, because I think the main problem in current democracies is that people are not incentivized to get the right information to vote. So why? Because anyone have one vote, no matter how competent or incompetent you are, no matter how rational or irrational you are, everyone has the same power. And this is a problem because imagine I want to be a competent voter for an election. I'll have to spend a lot of time. I will have to spend a lot of energy by reading all the political programs, for example. I'll have to know the constitution of the country, for example. So this demands, it's an epistemic investment that you need to do. and now imagine I do this for 1 month before the election, and then I see my neighbor, and my neighbor will not do any kind of epistemic effort for that. And at the end, I will see that I have the same power than my neighbor, right? So my uninformed neighbor will have 1 vote, and I will have 1 vote as well. So most people, they recognize this, and this is an interesting aspect that psychologists call rational ignorance. So most people understand that it's actually rational for them to be irrational or to be ignorant in an election, because it doesn't matter the kind of knowledge you will only have 1 vote. So for me, we need to think ways to incentivize knowledge for people. I try to do that based on specific theories in philosophy, which is called epistocracy, for example. But epistocracy can have different kind of formats or structures. I try to argue for something that is different, a more passive model of epistocracy, which basically claims the following. So first, I try to show that no, we don't have any moral obligation to vote in an election, but actually you have a moral obligation to be informed if you want to vote. So if you don't want to vote, if you don't want to get informed, then you don't need to be part of that process, because it will be better for everyone else, because the results will be better in general. Of course, this is controversy, but it's controversial, but I think we can use AI, for example, to increase the levels of knowledge. So, for example, governments can create literal campaigns using apps, for example, to inform citizens about that specific problem in elections. This was already made, for example, in Switzerland in a specific election. How do you call it? It's not an election, but it's whenever you want to. In Switzerland, they use a lot of this collective.
The referendum.
Referendum, yeah. Sorry. So there was a referendum about a specific issue, and the Swiss people voted, and then before the results were out, they performed studies about the knowledge of the citizens about that specific problem, and they noticed that most people were not informed. So basically, the results came out, and the results were cancelled, and Switzerland created like this public campaign about that specific problem, and then they tried the election again, the referendum, and then they noticed that people were sufficiently informed, and then the results were counted finally. So I think this is one way to think about epistocracy, right? Is to guarantee that citizens have at least a sufficient knowledge to consider that decision ethical as well. Yeah.
There's the topic of epistocracy is connected to, and democracy is connected to one of diversity. So I want to go to one of the questions that we received while we were chatting. So I'm going to read the question. Dear Steven Joachim, I wanted to sincerely thank you for the opportunity to participate in the interview. It was an enriching experience, and I greatly appreciate the insight you shared. How can we ensure that AI systems align with universal ethical principle while respecting cultural diversity? So that's the question.
Yeah, that's an interesting challenge. So if you think about universal ethics, there is no such a thing as universal ethics. So I think this is a challenge. But if you look, for example, at current medicine, we found a way to create actually a more or less ethical medicine without the need for a universal ethics. So I think my take is that when you look at the principalist view of bioethics, for example, it looks that it works fine from an ethical point of view. Of course, right now AI is different because, so Floridi, for example, he argues that we need to add a 5th principle to these 4 principles that already exist, which is the principle of explainability. But some people say that actually you can reduce explainability to the 4 other, to beneficence, non-maleficence, to autonomy, and justice. So it's debatable, but I think, of course, AI, the application of AI, for example, in medicine, makes something different, because I'm trying to argue that there is this distinction between an easy trust gap and a hard trust gap. So an easy trust gap is what happens when you go to a doctor and you talk with your doctor, and your doctor knows almost everything about your situation, but there are some details that he doesn't know. For example, the specific pharmacology, how does a drug works, for example, or how the radiological exams were performed. The doctor doesn't have that total information. So, but I'm arguing that the doctor in this situation has what I called epistemic potentiality, meaning that even if he doesn't know, he has the potential to know more. So he can talk with an expert on the radiology, and the radiologist can explain why that exam is like that. He can also talk with a drug expert and get more information. But because of the black box problem, I think AI medicine doesn't have easy trust gaps. We are confronted with hard trust gaps, meaning that if the doctor wants to have a full comprehension of the epistemic network of that system, there is no epistemic potentiality. So the potentiality is missing in that case. So in my view, what we need to do is to transform our trust gap into easy trust gaps, and this can happen if you focus your effort in explainable AI, basically. But there is also a lot of controversy about how we can think about explainable AI, what it means to have explanations from AI systems. I think most or current approaches to explainable AI will not solve the black box problem, because I think we need to have a sort of change in the way we think about explainability. And my view is that we need to think about the pragmatics of explainability. So we need to think about how humans provide explanations in current medicine, and then we need to think, or we need to test how AI system can perform this way of providing explanations, basically. And when you do that, you see that a fundamental cognitive process that happens in human medicine is abductions. So abduction is the way to reach the best hypothesis for a specific case. So when you think about abductions, and you basically you can test the power or the efficiency of AI system in performing abductive reasoning. And when you review the scientific literature about this, you see that AI systems are now good at something that we call selective abduction, which means that selective abduction happens when you have a specific medical situation and you have already pre-selected hypotheses to explain that specific solution. So think about common disease, like where we already have all the knowledge that we need to treat that disease. So selective abduction is what AI systems can do well compared with humans. But there is a second way of performing abduction, which we call creative abduction. And here is when we are dealing with scenarios where we have high medical uncertainty. And I think when we want to use AI in medicine, we want to use AI in medicine in scenarios where we have high uncertainty, where we don't know at all what is happening. Think about like the COVID-19, for example, the pandemics, right? We all the medical treatments were not efficient to treat that specific disease. Even the pharmacology associated with the symptomatology that was similar were not working. So in this case, doctors had to perform creative abductions. They had to look for hypotheses that were not already pre-made. So I think my take is what I'm trying to argue with in a paper that I published called Crossing the Trust Gap in Medical AI, is that we need to put some effort in developing the capacity of AI systems to perform creative abductions and not only selective abductions. And this is a long answer for the question, but I'm not sure I got something of it.
Oh, it was perfect.
But, yeah.
Very interesting. I would like to ask you one final questions while we are waiting for if there are more questions from the public. And this is a more general question about how we humans approach the development of new technology. Right. So as we see, like within university, in the media, the there are two main polarizing stances towards new technology. They're like the overly optimistic, that they will think that the new technology, new AI technology will solve all the issues and it will bring us to the next step of evolution or whatever. And then there are those who are very pessimistic, that they will think that this technology will exacerbate social inequalities, that it will bring other harmful problems or existential risks, and so on. And we've seen this pattern for any new technological development related to AI. So I would like to ask you, what is, in your view, like the best critical and ethical approach to AI technologies, to the development of new AI technologies?
Yeah, so I think there is not such a thing as the best, I think what we need to do is we need to fight this way of thinking about the technology in a very, extreme way. I'm pretty sure the right answer is not the total use or the total prohibition again. And I think we need to find specific methodologies to consider the ethics of AI. So, for example, imagine an technology that looks very positive in any aspects of it. I think in that case we need to perform what I call a negative stance into that technology. So this means that we need to really think negatively about this technology and find where the technology can be problematic. But this will not be clear because the technology looks very interesting in a positive way right away. So we need to go deeper. We need to perform critical, thinking about that specific technology. But you can also do the opposite. So imagine a technology that looks really bad from an ethical point of view. We can also do a positive stance towards it. So we can think very deeply about, okay, this looks very badly, but is there any way to make it, interesting from a moral point of view? Of course, there is also another philosophical assumption here, which is that at least I think that most technologies are sort of neutral from a normative point of view, and then only their application can be judged normatively. So if you think, for example, even like the nuclear weapons, for example, they were based on nuclear technology that were interesting as well for creating, for example, energy for society. So I think this critical way to think about technology is an important one. So never assume the best or the worst, but always try to find another angle. And this other angle needs, it's related with what I was saying before about the interdisciplinarity. Because I think technology really requires not just from a philosophical approach to AI, but it really needs to be thought in a multidisciplinary way because of the multidisciplinary impact it will have. So you will never be able to have the right ethical justification for a technology if you are just using computer scientists to justify it, or even just ethicists. You need more. You need to look at the cultural impact, the social impact, the economical impact as well, the political impact, and this will require always an interdisciplinary team. Of course, this is an effort that leadership will have to make, right? But I think it's an effort that society welcomes, and actually I think every citizen is also interested in that, right? In having a society that can provide the best moral tools also for its development and to achieve a better justice for everyone, not just for those who are developing the technology, but also for those who will suffer directly or indirectly with it. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Steven. And on the notes, I would like to thank everyone who joined us for this interview with Dr. Steven Gouveia. It was extremely interesting and it was a pleasure to have you. And see you everyone. So muchas gracias para participar a esa entrevistas. Ustedes pueden encontrar esa transmisión en el canal